Welcome and thank you for tuning in to the 412 Double Play Podcast. I am, as always, host Michael Castrogano, keeping it going with the affiliates for the Pirates, possibly the most exciting team, at least to start the season this year, with the Altoona Curve. My guest this week to talk about them, among his many other jobs, he's a writer for the Altoona Mirror covering the Curve, Jarrod Prugar. Jarrod, thanks for jumping on with me today. Excited to talk Curve ball and the exciting roster that they have to start the season, at least. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me on and talking a little bit of curve baseball. It should be a very exciting year. All eyes, I think, are going to be on Altoona to start the season, and that's going to be one of those unique things as they get started here once again.
Yeah, well, starting off with the Curve, they had Curve Fest at PNG Field last weekend. I was able to go to Pirates Fest for the first time this year. Have never been to Curve Fest, hadn't even heard of it, but it's interesting that like a minor league team or that minor league teams in general have events like this. Have you been to Curve Fest? And if so, what can you say about the event and how it's different than, I guess, Pirates Fest for some fans who may have gone to the parent event?
Well, the beauty, I guess, and maybe the shocking thing for me was it's at PNG Field, which I think is great. It's good to get people to the ballpark. I was able to make it last week, which it was a pretty unique experience. At Pirates Fest, I know a couple years ago when they had it at PNC Park, it was great, and it was a really cool situation. You got to see the batting cages and things like that. But for the Curve, they don't have an indoor space. So it's outdoors. It's in February or March. Yeah, March, I think. Yeah, we're still in March.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so it was outdoors. There were space heaters. There are different vendors. There's free food. And there's a band playing. It's all on the upper concourse, which is not very big. But as they're getting the stadium set up for the season, so that was kind of unique. They had jerseys to sell. But for the Pirates, they have at least have the club level where you can be indoors and you don't have to spend a lot of time outside. Or they, of course, have it at the convention center. And that makes it a little bit more unique. And there's so much space and activities. But for Altoona and for minor league teams, that's not always an option. It's not like they can call up the David L. Lawrence Convention Center and be like, hey, we're going to come over or whatever. And Altoona's fortunate enough, we do have our own convention center, but it's packed with stuff like that. But I think the idea is to bring people to the ballpark and that established that. And obviously they have a lot of cool initiatives and things going on this year off the field that I think are going to be really cool.
Cool. Did they have some current or former players? I know Altoona, was it Altoona last year? They retired a number, or that may have been Indianapolis.
That was Altoona. They retired Roberto Clemente's number. So that number is now permanently in right field. They had his family up for that, and that was a really cool experience. They also had the Clemente Museum there with a display and for the ceremonies, which is really if you ever have the opportunity to go to the Clemente Museum in the Strip District, it is a wonderfully done place, and it for any baseball lover, whether you're a Pirates fan or not, it's worth the price of admission, which is appropriately $21.
Yep.
But no, there were no.
One caveat on that is you need to book your tickets ahead of time. You can't just go the day of and expect to get in.
Right. And no, there weren't any former players. I do think that they're going to have some former players coming back this season. But for Curve Fest, mascots were there, and it was more or less a meet and greet, get your tickets kind of event with some free food and stuff like that. But they have a lot of different players. I think like Ike Taylor is supposed to be there. And then a couple celebrity appearances as well this year. And they're debuting the Copa America team or identity, Peces Dorados, which is Spanish for goldfish. And everybody's the most lovable character in minor league baseball, Altoona, the rally fish.
Of course. Yeah, Taylor Davis is going to be the catching coach. I'm going to talk about the coaching in a little bit. But first, Pirates GM Ben Cherington has said in the past that he views AA as essentially equal to Indianapolis, kind of like a holding ground for players in Indianapolis, but the real development happens at Altoona as far as preparing players for MLB, for playing with the Pirates. He's shown some instances of pulling players directly from AA to the bigs, hasn't always led to the best results. Jack Sawinski and Rodolfo Castro. Sawinski, ended up figuring things out, but they both were eventually sent back to AAA for some conditioning. Regardless, the organization hasn't exactly, I don't want to say imprisoned, but like relegated prospects, at least top prospects, to AAA for extended periods of time. Is the divide in talent and opposing opponents in the levels between AA and AAA less vast than it used to be, or are we likely to see prospects maybe spending more time in AAA rather than getting a bigger jump right from Altoona?
Every organization is different. And I think that's the thing. Like now that I'm covering the team on a day-to-day basis, you see how different teams, like the Orioles, handle their prospect development, or the Nationals, or whoever. And it's unique to see that because there were a couple last year that jumped to Double A, or spent minimal time in Triple A, like Henry Davis. So it's tough to gauge that, and I think it's player specific. But the beauty of Altoona is it's only an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours away from Pittsburgh, whereas Indianapolis is not that by any means. And it's so the ease and everything. You just hop on 22 and you go from the ballpark, and that's one of those situations where that the convenience of Altoona is second to none. And I think that's why you see a little bit more of that from Altoona curve players, like Lever Piguero, for instance. And it's just easier. And it might not always help their development, but it's just one of those situations where, hey, we have these guys 2 hours away, they're at home. And that's we can keep a better eye on them, which is why I think Henry Davis started the year last year in Altoona rather than AAA. And I think that selfishly, that's why I'm thinking that Paul Skeens starts the season in Altoona as well. Yes, I say selfishly because that's going to boost a lot of content on my end. But I also think they're able to they have much more eyes on them. It's easy to come into Altoona. You can come in and see them on a Monday, which is an off day typically, but you can come in and see their morning work or see their afternoon work, and then you're back in Pittsburgh for the Buccos game. So that aspect of it, I think, is great. But to get back to the point, it's always going to be player specific. At least if I'm running the organization, it's got to be. Can the player handle it? The way that it was always explained to me is that you have a lot of throwers in high A and low A, and then people become pitchers in Double A. So you see everybody kind of retune things and refine things, and I think when you have a guy go from the majors from Double A to the majors, it's tough to replicate that success because there's so much pressure. The mental game, I think, is probably more so an impact than the physical game. And I think that's what you saw with guys like Castro, guys like Sawinski. It's just getting over those mental hurdles. And even Piguero, Piguero gets called up and then sent back down, and that's not an easy situation to deal with either.
Yeah, he was only up for, I think, technically one game, went 1 for 3 with a walk. And that was back in 2022. Now it seems like he's going to be full-time with the team. But pivoting to the coaching staff, this offseason brought some shakeups with coaches across the system. Notably, Altoona's almost entire coaching staff is going to be overhauled from 2023. It's kind of been a trend that they've been doing the past few years. But at the top, manager Kalis Crabb was moved to offensive coordinator, is the title that I'm seeing for it in the Florida complex. Pitching coach Cale Johnson left to coach at Dallas Baptist University. I read that was personal, have a little bit more
that one
of a normal kind of season.
That one's tough to gauge because he left in the middle of the season, and that's very, very rare.
Right.
But DBU is a great place to go coach. He's from there, or from that area, I believe. And that's an opportunity that there's a little bit more stability at the college level, I think, to an extent. And honestly, there might have been a little bit more money as well. High level college baseball pays a little bit better than Double A coaching staff. And
DBU is D1, and they're pretty consistently like a pretty competitive team. I don't follow college baseball nearly as much, but yeah,
right. And he's got a young family. That stability, I think, is something that he craved, and everybody craves, I think, at that age when you have a young family. And it was weird because of the timing. You never see a coach leave in the middle of a season, or very rarely. But when you get an opportunity like that, you can't really pass it up.
That was a weird one. Blake Butler, he was the performance coach at Altoona last year. He's going to be the manager at Greensboro. Hitting coach John Nunnally, we know no longer with the organization. I'm not going to go into that saga, but it's overall a small staff. It's only about 6 or 7 people in total. And the team wasn't great. If you look offensively and on the pitching side, they finished in the bottom half for most metrics. And we're going to get into like the breakdowns on that later on. But they did finish with a modest 67 and 66 record last year. Is there a reason for the extreme turnover on the coaching staff, or is this just a bunch of different instances kind of coming together?
I think it's more coincidental and a lot of instances coming together, like you said. The Nunnally situation is frustrating because you have probably your most trusted hitting coach, and now he's no longer with the organization. He's going to be doing some private work on the side, it's a head scratcher for sure. But obviously, people at the upper levels, and even speaking with Nunnally myself, he thinks that a lot of the issue was the Brian Hayes thing, and they got to stick by their guy. They got to stick with Haynes, and it is what it is. But I think they're just putting guys where they think are better suited. I think, we talk about family, and Calix is a friend of mine now after spending the year with him. He's got 2 young kids in Florida, and to see them and be around them every day, I think it's probably more so a blessing in disguise for him to be in the complex league now and working it in Bradenton, so he can be around his young family. And he's a hitting guy. He's a guy that studies the body's movements, and he was all. It's funny, in my interactions with him, and I was there every day other than Saturdays most of the season last year. And he's always reading. He's always working on certain things and studying. And I think that's something you want in a manager and want in a coach, somebody that's always learning. But right now, you look at Robbie Hammock, who's coming to Altoona from Greensboro. A lot of the guys on this roster are going to have played in Greensboro. So there's familiarity there. You always want that familiarity. And that's typical of what they've done year after year. Crab came from Greensboro,
the previous year.
Mike Ryan had a lot of experience back when he was a coach in the organization from Bradenton and coming up. And even, oh man, I'm drawing a blank on the AAA manager right now. Miguel
Perez?
Miguel Perez. Even him, he had quite a bit of experience managing these guys when he came to Altoona prior to 2020. So that aspect of it, the managerial aspect of it, is normal. It's all the other position coaches that are just kind of everything's working out in a different way than what's usual. But the good news is they have Gary Green. Gary Green is the bench coach for them. He's been there for quite a bit of time in the organization. But he's going to be that elder statesman to help these young guys out as they figure out how to coach at the minor league level, which isn't always an easy thing to do when a lot of these guys are pretty young.
Yeah, a lot of my next question you basically touched on with Hammock coming in. He's going to be the 15th manager in Curve history. You mentioned Gary Green, bench coach. They've also brought in Brady Conlin. He was the hitting coach after spending 2023 in Indianapolis as the performance coach. Still mixed on exactly what that role is, but Fernando Nieve was pitching coach at Greensboro, so he's going to be coming up. You mentioned how Hammock coming from Greensboro, previously Crab coming from Greensboro. Is it the organization intentionally pushing these coaches along with certain prospects? Because there are going to be a lot of guys who were in Greensboro last year who are going to be potentially important to the long-term success for the Pirates. Are they trying to keep that coaching staff and that kind of consistency intact as they move along?
Yeah, I think so. And that's been by design, even under Huntington and Coonley. When those guys were in charge, that was kind of the track that you saw everybody making. And I think you want that familiarity, you want that chemistry, for sure. But this is a pitching staff that's going to be very, very impressive. And Nieve has a lot of experience with a lot of their staff, including guys like Quinn Priester and Luis Ortiz and Jarrod Jones, who's been the spring training darling. And you've also got Anthony Solometo, Bubba Chandler and Thomas Harrington as well. And then, like I said, selfishly, hopefully Paul Skeens, but beggars can't be choosers. Even with guys without Skeens, this is a roster that has a lot of hope and a lot of promise. But again, you don't always. It's not always the wins and losses. You mentioned the team last year, and they played. They were very much their record. They were not a great team by any means. I think on paper, you think that they were probably going to be better than what they were, but they were just very, very mid-tier, very mediocre at times. They just couldn't put it all together for a string of 6 games or what have you. But the natural progression as coaches is obviously just like the players. You go up single A, double A, triple A. You want more stability in triple A, but you also want to see how your coaches progress as well. And I think that's why you see guys like Hammock move up, guys like Krabby move up, and people like that. And then they figure out their roles within the organization and see what best suits them.
Yeah. And I'm not opposed to that philosophy, especially if players have preference whom they've been working with. Looking to the roster and prefacing this with the obvious caveat that minor league teams have a lot of turnover. That was the case in Altoona last year, but there is a sizable drop every year as far as offensive output when players come from Greensboro. They seem, I don't want to say wholly unprepared, but compared to their peers in the Eastern League, it seems like they underperform. Out of 12 teams last year, we're talking about how they were middle of the pack. They finished 8th in runs, 9th in home runs, 11th in OPS, dead last in doubles. They were 3rd in stolen bases. They had 4 players with 19 plus bags snagged each, but the bigger, bolder, top end stats, they're not achieving. They're not really, pacing their competition. Is there a specific reason for that performance, that drop off? Because these guys, they crush home runs in Greensboro because it's, a bandbox. And then they come to Altoona, which is a little bit more. But why is the adjustment not taking at this time?
I think it's a couple of different reasons. Obviously you mentioned it. Greensboro is a bandbox. It's a launch pad for a lot of those guys, and Altoona is not that. But also you're starting up here and it's cold. You come from obviously North Carolina. It can get chilly at times too. They're not immune from the cold weather. But in Altoona in March and April, it's not pleasant more often than not. So you're not playing in 60, 70, 80-degree weather like you would be in June or July or in August. So that I think has an impact as well. But I think it's just the natural growth of the game. You go from high A in Greensboro where like I mentioned, they're throwers. But now you're pitching against guys that, hey, they're 2 steps away or a step away, depending on the organization from the major leagues. So their pitching is a little bit more fine-tuned. They're now pitching. They're hitting their spots. They're more accurate as far as that goes. And they're professional hitters. We talk all the time about pitchers and reacting and whatever, but hitters are the same here too. They might have professional experience as far as playing major leagues. They might or spend some time in AAA, and they're naturally older. And last year it was a pretty young group for the most part, and that experience matters as well. And I think we see these guys as prospects, and they come in the system at 20, 21, 22 years old, so they're only maybe 23 or 24 when they get to Altoona, and that's still a young ball player. It's still a raw, unfinished player, and when that happens, you get the ups and downs, and you get the lowest of the lows, and sometimes the highest of the highs, and that's kind of where you see everything kind of sort itself out with players in the AA level, because now they're getting better, and maybe plateauing, or they continue their steady growth, and then you get to see what happens. But Altoona is not an easy place to hit. By any means, especially with the first part of the season being cold. The same thing with throughout the Eastern League, but again, other teams are able, and I think it just goes back to prospect development and player development, and what are they doing to make sure that doesn't happen. And personally, I thought that Nunnally was one of the better hitting coaches in the league, or in the Eastern League, and in the organization, and it's unfortunate that now he's not employed by the organization anymore. But it is what it is, and you can't really use that as an excuse anymore. And now it's time to see what Brady Conlon can do. And he's a younger guy that is going to be able to relate to some of these younger players. But this is going to be a very broad, inexperienced team as well, depending on how the shakeup of the roster turns up after spring training.
Yeah, I think that we, as majority of people who would listen to this, focusing mainly on the Pirates and Major League Baseball, fans have been kind of spoiled in the fact that we've had so many really young players debut. Even in recent years, you see Ronald Acuna Jr., Corbin Carroll, Julio Rodriguez, the Reds having Ellie De La Cruz for all his warts. The majority of players do need that kind of development. They're not going to be able to just come up and be this like top 10 player. That development happening in AA, where, like you said, pitchers become pitchers instead of throwers, it can be a bit of a challenge. Now, the curve offense, in my opinion, should improve for 2020. They should have the Pirates' top hitter in Termarr Johnson. If he doesn't start the year there, he should be early on. Other top prospects like Jack Brannigan, I think should be there. Shang-Chi Chang is coming back. Jace Bowen, I think he only got a cup of coffee last year with Altoona, so he'll probably stay there. Which hitter or hitters are you most excited to see in Altoona this season?
I'm very excited to see Termarr Johnson. I think, when you look at what he's been able to do just in spring training, he's been very impressive. But to see him play, I think is going to be a lot of fun. Shang-Chi Chang played really well down the stretch for Altoona as soon as he got called up. And Jace Bowen did have a couple moments here and there last year after his promotion late in the season. But Termarr, I think, is the guy that everybody's watching, right? We talk about how Henry Davis has been doing, and Davis is a guy that came up to the league and struggled, and it's not easy. We forget how hard it is to hit a round ball with a round bat square, and it's not an easy thing to do at any level, let alone in the major league level when you're a top prospect and you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. But for Termarr Johnson, I think what he's doing in Bradenton right now and throughout the Grapefruit League has been very impressive, and I'm excited to see that happen, in person. And get to know him as a person and player as well. And I think that's the other thing too, is the beauty of watching the prospects is seeing what makes the player the player. And that's, I think, the best part about it. We talk all the time about prospects this and prospects that, and the Curve have had no shortage of top prospects come through in recent years. And if anybody was in Altoona when Skeens debuted, it was one of the most electric atmospheres for 35 seconds that anybody has seen in Altoona in quite some time. And if they follow his current path, if he is scheduled to be in Altoona, he would start opening day in Altoona on, I think it's Tuesday, April 5th or somewhere around there, or April 9th, I think is what it is. I think opening day for them is actually April 5th. And it would be against Dylan Cruz if he makes the AA roster out of spring training for the Nationals. But Termarr, I think, is the guy. It wasn't like a team that was loaded with hitters last year. You had Matt Gorski, who spent a good deal hurt, and then everybody else, it just kind of fizzled out. Connor Scott was productive, and you started out with Henry Davis, and Henry Davis did his thing, and then gets called up, and now he's hopefully going to make the team out of spring training, and wherever he catches or plays the outfield or DH or whatever remains to be seen.
I'm not going to talk about the Pirates, what's going on with them in this segment, but I'm pretty confident that they're come opening day. So the Curve open on the road in Akron on the 4th or 5th. Let me see, where do I have that here? On the 5th. And then, the 10th, April 9th is when they open against the Harrisburg Senators. But talking about the rotation, and we mentioned before a number of names, Altoona could potentially open the season with the best rotation really in all of minor league baseball, even if they don't have Skeens. Fangraphs projection, they have Braxton Ashcraft, Bubba Chandler, Anthony Salamito, and Thomas Harris. Maybe Paul Skeens is part of that. If not, if he goes to Indianapolis to start the year, Ho Yu Chen likely slots into that rotation. He was a workhorse for Greensboro last year. Like, where do you begin with this rotation, and what are your thoughts on this arsenal of young arms who are like, we've got 4 or 5 arms listed in the top 100 on almost all. Like, we have a gluttony of riches here. What are your thoughts on them, either individually or as a whole?
Well, I mean, pound for pound, it's an incredible rotation. I mean, Skeens aside, I mean, even without that, it's very impressive. And Solometo pitched very well after getting called up. And Ashcraft played very well in minimal innings. You know, I'm excited to see Ashcraft, whether he starts in Altoona or it goes to AAA. That's another one. I want to see him extended in Altoona. You know, last year he was on a limit and ended the season, you know, rather prematurely, but he's coming off of Tommy John. It's keeping those guys healthy. Bubba Chandler played really well. He was he was, you know, down in the dumps for a good bit of the season, and then he turned it around. And he played well for Altoona in his cup of coffee in AA last year. And I think, you know, I don't know if there's a good place to start, because you can start with any one of them, and themselves as individuals are phenomenal prospects in and of themselves. But again, now it's an opportunity to see them play every 5th day or every 6th day, or however they want to handle it to start the season. But you look at that on paper, and it's a lot of potential, and you hope that they just keep developing. You know, there is a stockpile, but we've seen the development process get stunted a couple times here. Mitch Keller comes to mind as a guy that blew through single A, double A, and then started to struggle. And now, luckily for him, you know, he's figured it out. And I think that's great for Mitch. Mitch is a great dude. I watched him pitch lights out in the Eastern League Championship a couple of years ago here. And you want to see guys like that continue to develop and continue to stay healthy. And I think that's the biggest thing is staying healthy and just continuing development and continuing that positive trajectory toward the major leagues. And I think all these guys can be major league arms here in the next few years, if not next 6 months to a year.
Yeah. The old adage of can't have enough arms. It's not going to matter. And potentially some of them could be debuting sometime this year. Braxton Ashcraft is already on the 40-man. We mentioned Skeens is almost definitely going to debut at some point this year. But a lot of upside with Chandler and Solometo as well. I mentioned that Altoona is opening their season in Akron at home for the Senators the next week. Like you said, if Skeens is on the team, he'll be there for opening day facing his former teammate and Dylan Cruz. We were supposed to get that matchup last year, but they shut Skeens down after his 6.2 innings of work. I've got my tickets to the game on April 13th. Be Paul Skeens bobblehead celebrating his debut, and that sellout crowd, I think the largest crowd in Curve history. So yes. I'm excited for that. I'm guessing it's going to be a bit chaotic again in the park. Last question for you on this. What recommendations do you have for things I need to do, see, eat, drink? Any of that?
Well, at the ballpark, I'm a big Curve Burger guy. I always, and that's kind of the running joke with MLB.com's Alex Stumpf. He always owes me a Curve Burger whenever he comes into Altoona. But no, I mean, the ballpark itself is beautiful. There's a lot to do there, and you can't really go wrong. Now, if you're in town for the day, the Horseshoe Curve is very clearly one of the best places to go as a tourist. And then also the Railroaders Museum if you're into the trains and railroads. As far as for wings, you know, you mentioned Dylan Cruz and the Skeens matchup. They went to the Knickerbocker, which has phenomenal wings. I couldn't confirm or deny who paid for that, given they make a boatload of money now in each respective ways. But there are a lot of good options there for food. And then if you're just a typical hot dog guy, Texas Hot Dogs, which is just a couple minutes from the ballpark, they got some good chili dogs there with some sauce on it. But you can't really go wrong, especially with making sure that you get the Curve Burger.
All right, great. Well, I'm excited to check out Altoona, see the curve. Excited for their season. They've just got so many interesting prospects. I can't rave on this enough. So thank you so much for jumping on with me, and I will be right back to recap this past week with Pittsburgh Pirates. And I am back, another week in the books for spring training, another week closer to the start of the regular season. The Pirates are 5th best currently in OPS, 3rd best in slugging, while being top 5 to 10 in most other offensive categories. They currently lead all of MLB for home runs this spring with 31. The next closest team is the Orioles with 26. So currently, among all of MLB, there's 25 hitters who have 3 or more home runs thus far this spring. 5 of them are Pirates. Henry Davis, O'Neill Cruz, Ke'Bryan Hayes, Brian Reynolds, the obvious ones, and then Kanaan Smith and Jigba, which is just fun that he's there because waiver claim. It's only spring, so certainly not at a point where we're saying we have a 4-way race for the home run title this year, or 5-way, but it's also not bad. The Florida win can be attributed in part to some of the home runs, the long balls that are happening. But Cruz hit 2 scorchers in the game today. I think it was 114 and 116 for exit velocity. Hayes has been consistently barreling the ball. He's had, I want to say, like 80 to 90% of his hits have gone 95 plus miles an hour off the bat. It's definitely positive things to see. The results from the pitching has been a bit more mixed. We have gotten to see some of the top pitching prospects at some point, so they've mostly all been reassigned to minor league camp. I'll talk about the pitching battle in a second, but past week for highs and lows, competition for the second base job is still far from decided. Jarrod Prugar is impressing with the glove and with the bat. He currently has an 873 OPS over 28 plate appearances. He's been fielding at second base, third base, shortstop, and he's at least proficient. He hasn't had an error. He just looks really solid in the field. Leo Peguero, who's also in competition for that second base job, has looked every bit a major leaguer himself. 985 OPS and 21 plate appearances. It's almost definitely going to be one of them. It seems likely that both of them break camp with the team, whether one of them is a utility, if they kind of split time at second base. It seems most likely that Jarrod Prugar, because of his versatility, is going to bounce around the diamond, first base, second base, shortstop, third, potentially see him in the outfield, depending on how that situation plays out. But they're both going to break camp when we head out of Bradenton in a few weeks. Nick Gonzalez still in competition for a spot as well. Hasn't looked comfortable at the plate. His pitch that he likes is a fastball. He's aggressively chasing it. He's looked awful against anything besides the fastball, and he's swinging early and often in Bradenton. He's been striking out a bit, been whiffing a lot. Small sample size, but a 684 OPS in his time thus far is not really what you want to be seeing. I think he's just kind of pressing, and most likely he's going to go to Indianapolis at least for to start the season. For the third outfield job, we've obviously got Sawinski in center, Reynolds in left, right field's up for grabs. Joshua Palacios, he had a delayed start to the season. Our recent acquisition from the Royals, Edward Olivares, is underperforming. It's kind of opened up some opportunities for the non-roster invitees to make waves. Gilberto Celestino has racked up the most plate appearances among those options, really among the Pirates players. He's also had the most hits on the team with 10. He's posted a 435, 500, 565 triple slash over his 12 games played. Fellow NRI Billy McKinney, who the Pirates acquired from the Yankees this past offseason, he's posted a triple slash of 353, 543, 412 in 10 games played so far. I don't know how the team's going to go about that. Obviously, a move would need to be made from the 40-man if they decide to add one of those two. Palacios and Olivares are both on the team. It struggles. Illness obviously has kind of kept them down, but we do still have a little over 2 weeks left for them to make that decision. The prospects have been seriously impressive. Jamar Johnson and Shang-Chi Chang obviously stand out as they've been on the higher end for prospects receiving at-bats. Chang has an 842 OPS, while Johnson currently sits at 1.298. He's crushing the ball. You see him in the game. He did make a costly error today that led to 2 runs scoring, struck out to end the game, but he looks so professional in the batter's box. The broadcast team was talking to Shelton during the game today while Johnson was at bat, and he was just lavishing so much praise on the young left-handed hitter, the second baseman of the future, potentially. There's a lot to like with Johnson, so I'm hoping that he continues to progress upward, and maybe we see him this season. So I think that's a long shot with his development and where it is right now. Pitching side, the rotation right now to open the season, to open spring training at least, is Mitch Keller, Martin Perez, Marco Gonzalez, and then we have 2 more spots which are up in the air between a handful of arms. Bailey Falter, he doesn't have an option. He was certainly an inroad to get one of those, but he's really struggled this spring. 6 runs off 11 hits in 6 innings. Hasn't really been getting strikeouts. Just not great. The other options have been a bit more impressive. Obviously, some potential holdups. Quinn Priester, he pitched in today's game. He had a blow-up inning where he gave up a grand slam, but there was a lot of stuff that led up to that. Ground ball that had a launch angle of like -28. Exit velocity was strong, but hit by pitch that the batter leaned into, and then a bloop single that just kind of fell in no man's land. Just one of those things that kind of happened. Ended up with a grand slam there. He had a 5-run outing today. Previously, he had only allowed 1 run in his previous, I think, 3 or 4 innings. His breaking pitches, his slider's looking really good. His curve is looking good. His fastball still not missing bats. That's something that's concerning, but it's also something that has been something that it's been an issue for him through the minor leagues. It's been something that he's aware of. If he throws it as like a show me pitch, then that's fine. If he could locate it on the corners, he can make it effective, but it just doesn't have any kind of deception on it for hitters. I mean, I would swing and miss at it, but they don't pay me the big bucks for this. Luis Ortiz, another option for the rotation. His fastball velocity has been looking good. 95, 96 he's touched in his 2 outings, I think, so far. 11 strikeouts in 8 innings pitched. Issue with him, sometimes he gets a little bit wild. He has 5 walks in those 8 innings. Can be a bit concerning. He's mostly fastball slider, and if one of those pitches is off, it's going to be a problem. But he might be one of the top options right now. Roansy Contreras, also like Bailey Falter, does not have an option. Needs to either make the team or go through waivers, and that, I mean, I don't know if he's gonna be picked. I don't know which way it's gonna go. His velocity is close to back. He's in the mid 90s, I think 94, 95 at least in the last start. Very sharp slider. His slider looked really good. He hasn't been able to put away hitters though. 1 strikeout in 6.2 innings of work. You got to try to figure out how to get the guys out of the batter's box, and he's just not doing it. Maybe he's getting some weak contact, which is good, but you can't rely 100% on that. You got to be able to get some strikeouts sometimes. Even Rich Hill gets strikeouts sometimes. Final name in the competition for this is a name we didn't expect coming into the spring, and that's Jared Jones. Shelton has stated outright that Jones is very much in competition for a rotation spot. He's been by far the best pitcher this spring. 7.1 innings, 3 hits, no earned runs. He gave up 2 unearned runs today due to an O'Neill Cruz error. 3 walks, 6 strikeouts, fastball touches 100, sliders disappearing on hitters. We're not seeing much of like the changeup. I think he's thrown it a couple times, but we're not seeing it a ton. It's something they're definitely working on. Curve, I think he also has, but it's hard to tell like with Baseball Savant how they're reading it because they're not always consistent with reading it accurately. But fastball and slider are great. If he becomes like a Spencer Strider type, where he's mostly on those 2, occasionally throwing a third optional, it's very possible he can be as successful as Spencer Strider. That's a high ceiling, but that's kind of the track that Jones is on. The velocity and arsenal is very similar. Given that he's not on the 40-man, a spot would have to come up. They are, playing with the PPI. They're playing with the not Rule 5, the Super 2 deadline. I don't know if that stuff's going to really be as important as we make it out to be, because Jones he's a very excellent pitcher and can be a very excellent pitcher. I think they're not really worried about that. Hopefully they can extend him if he becomes what they want him to be. He's not listed on the spring breakout roster, which was released this past week. So more reason to believe that the team is looking at him realistically as a rotation option to open the year. Definitely something to keep an eye on. As far as the clubhouse, we had a run of the flu in the Pirates clubhouse this past week. Paul Skeens, O'Neill Cruz, Palacios, and others have been scratched from lineups or announced that they would be playing in a game and then just not appearing there. Looks like that's been due to that illness that's been running through the clubhouse. Injury news. Only a couple here that I've heard of. Dauri Moreta, he left a game, I think on the second or third, with an apparent elbow injury. His fastball dropped down below 90. It's typically in like the mid 90s. It seems like it's going to keep him out for an extended period of time. Team hasn't provided anything substantial regarding the severity. However, they have reported that it is a ligament issue. They are checking their options. It's typically not going to be good news when it's a ligament issue. It's typically going to be something Tommy John or something in that vein, specifically the ulnar nerve vein. David Bednar, another relief pitcher. He hasn't appeared in the game yet due to reported lat tightness. He was playing catch for second straight day today, Sunday, March 10th, per beat writer Alex Stumpf. So hopefully he is progressing forward and can appear in games soon. Relief pitchers, they don't have to have the kind of build up to ramp up to pitching the same way that starting pitchers do. So ideally, even if he takes another week, should still be ready for the start of the season. This week is the inaugural spring breakout games. Pirates are one of the opening teams. They're going to be facing the Baltimore Orioles, and their roster includes many top prospects for the Pirates: Paul Skeens, Bubba Chandler, Anthony Solomito, Thomas Harrington, Jamar Johnson, Seung-Ji Chang, and more. Orioles, obviously, guys like Jackson Holiday. I'm not going to get into their roster, but it's going to be a really good matchup. Pirates will host the Orioles on Thursday, March 14th at 7:05 p.m. at Lecom Park. It's going to be streamed on MLB Network, ESPN Plus, Sportsnet Pittsburgh. Definitely something to watch if you. It's just a fun thing that they're doing. It's an exciting thing. It's great for the game. It's great for people to be able to see these prospects, especially be able to see them all in one place, because it's tough to be able to go and watch all the different affiliates broadcasts. I just learned last week that Greensboro has a broadcast now, so I'm going to be checking that out during the season, but I get to see them all one place, one station, one time, 7:05 Thursday, March 14th. So that wraps it up for all of us here at the 412 Double Play Podcast. Thank you to my guest Jarrod for coming on the show this week. You can check out his coverage for Altoona with the Altoona Mirror. Follow him on X at jprugar26. Got that in, obviously, if you're watching on video, you saw that. But definitely check him out. He's going to be covering the Curve all season. You can find me on X at 412 Double Play. Continue listening to the show on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever else podcasts are found. Subscribe to get notified when we drop our new episodes. Read the articles from myself, fellow podcasters at steelcity.com. This week, my co-editor, Gary Morgan, is going to be in Bradenton. He gets to go to that spring breakout game. So I will try to hold down the fort and hopefully have some articles up this week. I've been slacking, staying busy with the farm affiliate rundowns. So definitely check that out. We've got a lot of great writers, and we're doing this because we just enjoy it. But thank you again for checking out the show from all of us here at the 412 Double Play Podcast. Thank you for watching. Let's go Bucks. Sending it to my son Sawyer.
Lady Jolly Roger, dude.